If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
A rainy night in Texas. There is something strange nobody tells you when you first move to America alone. English is not as scary as silence. You can learn 1,000 vocabulary words, watch hundreds of listening videos, and fill your phone with apps called Speak English Fast. But one night, maybe at 2 in the morning, you will stand in a tiny kitchen, open your refrigerator, and see only half a carton of milk and a few slices of dry bread. And the thing that makes you want to cry will not be your English. It will be the fact that nobody is talking to you. If you have ever felt left behind in life, if you feel tired because your English is improving too slowly, if you watch other people fall in love, get married, build families, while you feel lost like one sock disappearing forever in the washing machine, then this story may be for you. I used to believe everything in life had to happen fast. Learn English fast. Make money fast. Fall in love fast. Get married fast. Americans always say, time is money, and I was naive enough to think that if I slowed down for even 1 second, the entire world would pass me like Black Friday shoppers running through a store. But then one rainy night in Texas slowed my whole life down. And strangely, that was the exact moment I finally started understanding English for real. That night, the rain was heavy. Texas is not cold like New York, but the rain there has its own sadness. The sound of water hitting the car windows felt like somebody softly knocking on old memories inside my head. I had just finished work at a small restaurant in Houston. My job back then was kitchen prep. It sounds okay until you spend 10 hours standing in oil smoke while your manager screams faster. Faster. Like he is training a Formula One racing team. I was exhausted. All I wanted was to drive home and sleep. But my car died in the parking lot. A perfect low-budget American movie scene. Rain. Darkness. Phone battery at 9%. And there I was, staring at the engine like if I looked at it long enough, it might fix itself out of pity. The human brain becomes very strange under stress. It stops thinking logically and starts producing stupid ideas with incredible confidence. I even hit the steering wheel lightly like people do in action movies. Spoiler alert, the car was not emotionally affected. Then suddenly, someone knocked on my car window. A man stood outside in the rain. Half his black jacket was soaked, and wet hair was stuck to his forehead. He leaned down slightly and asked slowly, "Need help?" The funny thing is, I had studied English for almost 2 years at that point, but my brain completely froze. I looked at him like a cat trying to understand electricity bills. I knew the word help, but when Americans speak in real life, especially in the rain, especially when you are panicking, English sounds like soup blended inside a washing machine. It took me almost 5 seconds to answer. Yes, car bad. Honestly, I sounded like a caveman discovering language for the first time. But he did not laugh. That was the first thing I remembered about him. People often say the hardest part about learning English is pronunciation. No. The hardest part is the fear of judgment after you make mistakes. Human brains react to social embarrassment almost the same way they react to physical pain. Some psychological studies in America have shown that when people feel rejected or mocked socially, the same pain areas in the brain become active. In other words, every time somebody laughs at your English mistakes, your brain quietly whispers, "Cool. We might die now." But he did not laugh. He simply nodded and opened the hood of my car like a normal person helping another normal person during a rainy night. That simple moment stayed with me for years. While he checked the engine, I stood beside him feeling completely overwhelmed. I hated the way I spoke English. I hated translating every sentence inside my head before opening my mouth. I hated feeling half a second slower than everyone else around me. You know that feeling when Netflix subtitles disappear before you finish reading them? That was my life in America back then. Everything moved too fast, while my brain sounded like an old laptop trying to open 10 Chrome tabs at the same time. Then he asked where I lived. Honestly, I understood maybe 70% of what he said. Many English learners believe they must understand 100% before having conversations. That is completely wrong. Native speakers sometimes do not even understand each other. Communication is not about understanding every single word. It is about staying inside the conversation instead of panicking and mentally running away like you are escaping zombies. I answered slowly, word by word. He slowed down too. And for the first time since moving to America, I felt like somebody was truly patient enough to wait for me to finish speaking. That changed everything. Because progress in English does not only come from grammar books. Sometimes it comes from feeling safe. When your brain stops being terrified of judgment, it learns much faster. That is why children learn languages quickly. They do not care if they sound silly. Adults are different. We want to sound perfect immediately. We want success before practice. Which is ridiculous when you think about it. It is like expecting six-pack abs before entering the gym. The rain lasted almost an hour that night. Eventually, he helped restart my car engine. I thought the moment would end there like one small act of kindness between strangers. But before walking back to his own car, he tapped lightly on my window and said, "You don't have to speak perfect English to belong here." I stayed silent for several seconds. Some sentences are not dramatic or poetic, but they somehow hit the exact place inside you that has been hurting quietly for years. That night, I drove back to my tiny apartment through the Texas rain thinking about his words again and again. Maybe my real problem had never been English. Maybe I was simply rushing too hard to become a perfect version of myself. And sometimes, love begins in the moment when somebody patiently waits for you to finish one broken English sentence under the rain in Texas. Why I rushed everything. There is a dangerous little lie that follows many immigrants when they arrive in America. It whispers into your ear every morning before work and every night before sleep. It says, you are already behind. And once your brain believes that sentence, everything becomes a race. You walk faster. You eat faster. You fall in love faster. You even panic faster. I did not notice how deeply this mindset controlled me until one strange afternoon at a grocery store in Houston. The store was crowded, bright, cold from the air conditioning, and filled with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Everybody around me looked like they knew exactly where they were going. Americans push shopping carts with incredible confidence. Even their grocery shopping feels organized. Meanwhile, I stood in front of the cereal aisle for almost 10 minutes trying to understand the difference between whole grain, multigrain, and high fiber. At some point I realized I was not actually shopping anymore. I was comparing my life to strangers buying cereal. That is how loneliness works sometimes. It turns normal situations into emotional documentaries narrated by your insecurities. I remember seeing couples laughing near the frozen food section while I held a basket containing instant noodles and cheap eggs like a depressed college student in a sad Netflix series. Back then, my life felt temporary. My apartment felt temporary. My English felt temporary. Even my dreams felt temporary. And psychologically, humans behave very differently when they believe life is unstable. Studies about stress and uncertainty show that when people feel insecure about their future, their brains become obsessed with speed and immediate results. That explains why I constantly pressured myself. Every morning I woke up with invisible deadlines inside my head. Improve your English quickly. Earn more money quickly. Get a better apartment quickly. Find love quickly. Build a future quickly. I treated life like an emergency room. The strange part is that rushing made everything worse. Especially my English. When you rush while learning a language, your brain enters survival mode. Instead of listening calmly, you become terrified of making mistakes. Your focus disappears because anxiety consumes your attention span. Imagine trying to enjoy music while somebody screams beside your ear every 5 seconds. That was my brain during conversations. Americans would speak normally, and my mind would instantly panic. What did he say? Say something smart. Hurry. Don't sound stupid. Why are you so slow? Ironically, the more pressure I created, the less English I understood. One evening, I met the man from the rainy night again. His name was Daniel. Life in America is funny sometimes. In movies, people reunite dramatically at airports or weddings. In reality, I saw him standing inside a coffee shop trying to decide between 2 muffins like it was a life-changing political decision. When he noticed me, he smiled immediately. That surprised me. Americans smile often, but this felt different. It felt genuine. He invited me to sit with him, and within 30 seconds my brain started performing Olympic-level panic again. My shirt suddenly felt uncomfortable. My English disappeared. My hands forgot where to exist naturally. Scientists actually have a reason for this. When humans become nervous around someone they like, the brain releases stress hormones that temporarily affect memory and concentration. In simple words, attraction can literally make you dumber. Which honestly explains a lot about my behavior that year. Daniel spoke slowly while drinking black coffee that smelled strong enough to wake up dead ancestors. He asked simple questions about my life in America. Where did I work? Did I enjoy Texas? Did I miss home? The conversation should have been easy. But inside my head, I was translating every sentence manually like an exhausted human version of Google Translate from 2008. The problem with overthinking is that it destroys natural communication. I was so busy trying to speak perfect English that I stopped acting like a real human being. My answers became short and robotic. Yes. No. Maybe. At one point, Daniel laughed softly and said, "You know, you can take your time." That sentence hit me harder than expected. Because nobody had told me that before. America often feels obsessed with speed. Fast food. Fast internet. Fast success. Even motivation videos online scream at you like angry fitness coaches. Wake up at 5 a.m. Build 7 income streams. Learn English in 30 days. Meanwhile, your nervous system is sitting in the corner eating chips and begging for mercy. I think many people learning English secretly believe slowness means failure. But language learning is not a car race. It is more like growing a tree. You cannot pull the branches harder to make it grow faster. You only damage the roots. Daniel told me something interesting that day. He said when he was younger, he used to rush relationships too. He wanted immediate certainty, immediate commitment, immediate answers. But every relationship failed because he never learned patience. Then he smiled at me and said, "People reveal themselves slowly. Real love is slow." I pretended to sip my coffee calmly after hearing that, but internally my soul was doing cartwheels. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that before. Most conversations in my life back then were about bills, schedules, work shifts, or survival. Suddenly there was this man sitting across from me talking slowly about patience like life was not a competition. And honestly, it confused me. Because deep down, I did not know how to slow down anymore. My body had become addicted to stress. There is science behind that too. Chronic stress changes your nervous system. Some people become so used to anxiety that calmness actually feels uncomfortable. That was me. If nothing stressful happened for a few hours, my brain would create problems for entertainment. I would worry about money, my accent, my future children that did not even exist yet. And somehow convince myself I was failing at life before age 30. During our conversation, Daniel suddenly asked me a question that completely caught me off guard. When was the last time you enjoyed learning English? I opened my mouth, then stopped. Because I honestly could not remember. English had become pressure instead of curiosity. I treated every mistake like proof that I did not belong in America. But maybe language was never supposed to feel like punishment. Maybe it was supposed to feel like connection. That night, after leaving the coffee shop, I sat inside my car for almost 20 minutes thinking about everything he said. Rainwater still reflected across the parking lot lights, and for the first time in years, I noticed how quiet the world could feel when you stopped trying to outrun it. Maybe I had been rushing because I was afraid. Afraid of wasting time. Afraid of being alone. Afraid nobody would love the unfinished version of me. But life does not become beautiful because everything happens quickly. Sometimes the best things arrive slowly, softly, almost unnoticed at first. Like learning a new language. Or trusting another person enough to speak imperfectly in front of them. Or realizing your heart has been sprinting for so long that it forgot how to walk peacefully beside someone else. Coffee shop English. There is a very specific kind of loneliness that appears when you sit inside an American coffee shop surrounded by conversations you almost understand. Not completely. Just almost. And somehow almost can feel more painful than knowing nothing at all. Because when you understand nothing, your brain gives up peacefully. But when you understand 70%, your mind becomes a detective working overtime. You catch random words floating through the air like weekend, mortgage, therapy, dog sitter. And your exhausted brain tries to assemble them into logical meaning like a confused FBI agent. That was exactly how I felt the afternoon Daniel invited me to meet him again at a small coffee shop near downtown Houston. The place smelled like roasted coffee beans, vanilla syrup, wet jackets, and ambition. American coffee shops always feel like people are secretly writing novels or launching startup companies while drinking overpriced drinks with names longer than college essays. I arrived 10 minutes early because immigrants are terrified of being late. Honestly, I think fear of lateness becomes part of your DNA after moving to America. I sat near the window pretending to check my phone while actually rehearsing English sentences in my head like an actor preparing for a low-budget romantic comedy. How was your day? What do you do for fun? The weather is nice. Meanwhile, my nervous system was behaving like I was preparing for military combat. Scientists say social anxiety activates the same fight or flight response humans once used to survive predators. Which means technically, my brain viewed small talk as a dangerous wild animal. Daniel arrived wearing a dark blue hoodie, carrying 2 coffees already in his hands. I guessed your order, he said, smiling. That sentence alone nearly caused emotional collapse inside me because nobody had guessed anything about me in a very long time. When you live alone too long, even small kindness feels suspiciously powerful. He handed me a hot caramel latte, and I remember staring at it for a second thinking, this man either understands human psychology, or he is secretly a wizard. We sat near the window while rain clouds moved slowly outside. Texas weather changes personality every 6 hours. One minute the sky looks romantic, the next minute it looks like God opened 27 hairdryers directly into your face. Daniel talked calmly, slowly, without interrupting me. That detail mattered more than he probably realized. Many English learners think speaking practice means finding somebody who talks a lot. Actually, the best conversation partners are people who know how to pause. Silence gives language learners time to breathe. Time to think. Time to organize thoughts without panic. And panic is the true enemy of communication. There is fascinating research showing that when humans feel relaxed, the brain processes language more efficiently because working memory functions better. In simple terms, calm brains learn faster. Stressed brains just scream internally. At some point Daniel asked me why I moved to America. Such a simple question. But sometimes simple questions open very complicated doors inside people. I told him part of the truth. I said I wanted better opportunities, better income, a better future. All true. But not the full truth. The full truth was uglier. I moved because I felt stuck. I felt invisible back home. I thought changing countries would magically change me too. Like maybe confidence existed somewhere inside American air molecules waiting to enter my lungs. Spoiler alert, immigration does not automatically fix your identity crisis. It just gives your emotional problems international travel experience. Daniel listened carefully while slowly stirring his coffee. Then he said something unexpected. Most people think moving to another country means starting over. But really, you bring your old fears with you. They just learn English too. I laughed harder than expected. Mostly because it was painfully accurate. Fear had followed me everywhere. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of failure. Fear of being unwanted. Fear of not becoming successful quickly enough. Fear is exhausting because it constantly invents imaginary deadlines. Your brain keeps saying things like, you should already be fluent by now, or you should already have your life together. Social media makes this worse. Every video online shows somebody becoming rich, fit, fluent, married, emotionally healed, and spiritually enlightened before breakfast. Meanwhile, you're just trying to pronounce comfortable without sounding possessed. While we talked, I noticed something strange happening. For the first time in years, I was listening to English instead of fighting it. Normally conversations felt like verbal boxing matches. I would mentally block punches of vocabulary while desperately searching for grammar. But sitting there with Daniel felt different. My brain slowly stopped treating English like an exam and started treating it like connection. And honestly, that changed everything. Because language was never supposed to be perfect performance. It was supposed to help humans understand each other. At one point I accidentally used the wrong tense while telling a story from work. I stopped immediately and apologized. Sorry, my English is bad. Daniel leaned back slightly and looked genuinely confused. Bad, he repeated. You're communicating perfectly. That sentence stayed inside my head for weeks afterward. Because maybe fluency is not speaking perfectly. Maybe fluency is being understood despite imperfections. Babies communicate before grammar. Love letters contain mistakes. Friends interrupt each other constantly. Real human communication is messy. Only textbooks pretend conversations happen flawlessly. Outside the coffee shop window, people hurried through the rain carrying umbrellas and grocery bags while traffic lights reflected on wet streets. And suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. I had spent years trying to sound like a perfect English speaker instead of simply becoming myself in English. Those are completely different goals. One creates anxiety. The other creates freedom. Daniel eventually asked what I enjoyed doing outside work. My brain went completely blank. Not because I lacked vocabulary. Because I genuinely did not know anymore. Work had consumed my identity. Survival had replaced curiosity. That happens to many adults without them noticing. Stress shrinks life into basic functions. Wake up. Work. Eat. Sleep. Repeat until emotionally crispy. Studies about burnout show chronic stress reduces creativity and emotional motivation. In other words, exhausted brains stop playing. They only survive. Maybe that is why I loved those coffee shop conversations so much afterward. They reminded me I was still human beyond responsibilities and immigration paperwork and rent payments. One evening before leaving, Daniel pointed at the notebook I carried everywhere for English practice. Inside it were vocabulary words, grammar notes, pronunciation reminders, and tiny desperate attempts to improve quickly. He smiled gently and said, "You know, maybe you don't need to study harder. Maybe you just need to stop being cruel to yourself while learning." That sentence hit deeper than any motivational speech I had ever heard online. Because he was right. I treated myself worse than any teacher ever had. Every mistake became evidence against my worth. Every awkward sentence felt like personal failure. But language learning is not proof of intelligence. It is proof of courage. Courage to sound imperfect long enough until communication becomes natural. As we walked out of the coffee shop that night, cold air rushed across the parking lot while distant thunder rolled through the sky. And somewhere between the smell of rain and coffee and nervous laughter, I started realizing something dangerous was happening to me. I was no longer only looking forward to improving my English. I was starting to look forward to seeing him. His silence taught me. Nobody warns you that one of the hardest parts of love is not fighting. It is waiting. Waiting for replies. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for somebody to explain what changed. Human beings are surprisingly bad at uncertainty. In fact, psychologists say the brain often prefers bad news over no news because uncertainty forces the nervous system into constant alert mode. Which explains why staring at an unanswered text message for 6 hours can feel emotionally similar to preparing for a small natural disaster. Before moving to America, I thought relationships were simple. If someone liked you, they stayed close. If they cared, they answered quickly. If they disappeared, the relationship was over. Clean. Logical. Efficient. My brain loved efficiency back then. Unfortunately, real people are not customer service chatbots. They come with trauma, exhaustion, fears, responsibilities, family problems, emotional confusion, and occasionally the communication skills of a frightened raccoon hiding inside a trash can. A few months after meeting Daniel, our routine became strangely important to me. We met at coffee shops, grocery stores, bookstores, and sometimes just walked around parks while talking slowly about life. My English improved without me noticing. That is another strange truth about language learning. You often improve the fastest when you stop obsessing over improvement. Studies on language acquisition show emotional engagement increases memory retention. In simpler words, your brain remembers things better when feelings are attached to them. That explains why I could suddenly remember phrases Daniel used during conversations while grammar exercises still disappeared from my memory like socks in a dryer. One Friday evening he invited me to dinner at a small Mexican restaurant. The place was loud, warm, crowded, and smelled like grilled onions and lime. American restaurants always confuse me because portions are large enough to feed entire villages. I ordered carefully because I still translated menus like ancient historical documents. During dinner Daniel seemed quieter than usual. Not cold. Just distant somehow. His smile arrived slower. His eyes drifted toward his phone more often. Humans are experts at detecting emotional changes. Your brain constantly scans facial expressions, voice tone, and body language searching for emotional safety. Evolution designed us this way because social connection once determined survival. Which means when someone important suddenly feels distant, your nervous system reacts like security alarms inside a bank vault. I asked if he was okay. He smiled quickly and said, "Just tired." That sentence has probably started millions of emotional disasters worldwide. Over the next several days, something shifted. His replies became shorter. Sometimes hours passed before he answered. Then entire days. Rationally, I knew adults become busy. Emotionally, my brain behaved like a dramatic television actor discovering betrayal during season finale. Every notification sound made my heart jump. Every silence created imaginary stories inside my head. Maybe he lost interest. Maybe I said something embarrassing. Maybe my English annoyed him. Maybe he realized I was too emotional, too awkward, too complicated. Anxiety is fascinating because it creates fiction with incredible efficiency. The human brain hates incomplete information, so it fills gaps automatically. Usually with worst-case scenarios because evolution assumes survival is more important than peace of mind. Back then I checked my phone constantly like an exhausted stock market investor monitoring emotional bankruptcy. Sleep became difficult. Concentration disappeared. Even listening practice felt impossible because my mind replayed old conversations, repeatedly searching for hidden meaning. Have you ever reread old text messages trying to perform emotional archaeology? Like maybe if you analyze punctuation carefully enough, you can uncover why somebody changed. He used a period instead of an emoji. Clearly civilization is collapsing. One rainy night I sat alone in my apartment eating microwaved noodles while staring at our conversation history like it contained secret government codes. And suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. I was no longer afraid of speaking English incorrectly. I was afraid of losing someone who made me feel safe while speaking it. That difference mattered. Because language had slowly become emotional for me. Daniel was connected to my confidence, my growth, my feeling of belonging in America. Without realizing it, I had attached too much emotional weight to one person. Psychologists call this emotional dependency. When someone becomes your primary source of validation, their attention starts controlling your emotional stability. It feels romantic in movies. In reality, it turns your nervous system into a malfunctioning smoke detector. 3 days later, Daniel finally called me late at night. His voice sounded tired. Really tired. He apologized for disappearing and explained that his father had been hospitalized unexpectedly in another city. He had spent days driving back and forth between hospitals, dealing with family stress, paperwork, and exhaustion. I sat there silently holding my phone while guilt spread through my chest like cold water. While I had been creating dramatic relationship theories, he had been quietly struggling with something real. Then he said something that completely changed how I viewed love. "I'm sorry I disappeared," he said softly. "When life gets hard, I sometimes shut down instead of talking." That sentence stayed inside my mind for weeks afterward. Because suddenly I understood something important about relationships, culture, and even language learning itself. Not everyone expresses stress the same way. In many cultures, emotional silence means distance. In others, silence means protection. Some people talk more when overwhelmed. Others disappear temporarily because they fear becoming burdens. Understanding this requires patience. And patience was exactly what I lacked. I always wanted immediate reassurance. Immediate answers. Immediate certainty. But human beings do not work that way. Real connection requires tolerance for imperfect communication. Honestly, relationships are basically two nervous systems trying not to accidentally traumatize each other while paying rent and answering emails. The next time we met, Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles sat under his eyes, and his usual calm energy seemed fragile. We walked slowly through a quiet park while cold wind moved through the trees. At one point he suddenly stopped walking and looked at me carefully. "You know," he said, "you don't always have to panic when people become quiet." I laughed awkwardly because unfortunately he was completely correct. Then he added something even more important. "Sometimes silence has nothing to do with you." That sentence felt simple, but emotionally it was revolutionary. Because anxious people often personalize everything. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A tired expression becomes disappointment. A quiet day becomes emotional catastrophe. But mature love requires resisting the urge to center yourself inside every silence. There is also something beautiful about learning patience through another person. Before Daniel, I treated life like a speed competition. Faster healing. Faster success. Faster English. Faster love. But his silence forced me to slow down and tolerate uncertainty without immediately collapsing emotionally. And strangely, that skill improved my English too. Because language learning also requires patience with confusion. You must survive not understanding everything immediately. You must stay calm while meaning slowly becomes clear over time. That night before leaving the park, Daniel smiled weakly and apologized again for disappearing. But honestly, something had changed inside me already. I no longer needed constant reassurance every second to feel connected. For the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand that patience is not passive weakness. Patience is emotional strength. It is the ability to stay soft without demanding instant certainty from another human being. And somewhere between his silence, the cold Texas wind, and my slowly healing nervous system, I realized love was teaching me the same lesson English had been trying to teach me all along. Understanding takes time. Winter felt so lonely. Nobody prepares you for your first winter when you live far away from home. And no, I am not talking about snow or cold weather or wearing 6 layers of clothing like an emotionally exhausted onion. I am talking about the silence. Winter silence feels different in America. Streets become quieter earlier. Trees look tired. The sky turns gray for days like somebody forgot to recharge the sun. Even grocery stores somehow feel lonelier in winter. People move quickly with their scarves and coffee cups while cold air follows everyone through automatic doors. And if you already feel emotionally lost, winter does not comfort you. It quietly sits beside your loneliness and hands it a microphone. That year, Houston experienced one of the coldest winters I could remember since moving there. It was not freezing like Chicago or Boston, but for someone raised in a warmer culture, the air felt sharp enough to cut thoughts in half. I started waking up later, feeling tired constantly, losing motivation to study English. At first I blamed laziness. Then I blamed work stress. But psychologists actually have a name for this pattern. Seasonal depression. Reduced sunlight can affect serotonin and melatonin levels, influencing mood, sleep, and emotional energy. In simple words, sometimes your brain becomes sad because the sky forgot to cooperate. Back then I worked long shifts at the restaurant during the holiday season. Americans become terrifyingly festive near Christmas. Lights everywhere. Giant shopping crowds. Mariah Carey songs attacking innocent civilians in every store. Meanwhile I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for hours while hearing cheerful Christmas music in the background like emotional psychological warfare. One night after work I drove home through quiet streets covered in rainwater reflections and blinking holiday decorations. Families sat inside warm houses eating dinner together while I reheated leftover rice alone in my apartment. Social media made everything worse. Every scroll showed smiling couples wearing matching sweaters, children decorating Christmas trees, friends drinking hot chocolate beside fireplaces. Meanwhile, my biggest emotional achievement that week was successfully folding laundry before midnight. Loneliness is dangerous because it changes how your brain interprets reality. Studies show prolonged loneliness increases negative thought patterns and emotional sensitivity. Small problems suddenly feel enormous. Tiny disappointments become evidence that your entire life is failing. One Sunday morning, I woke up unusually late after ignoring 3 alarms. Outside my apartment window, the sky looked pale and empty. I made coffee, opened my English notebook, stared at vocabulary words for 5 minutes, then closed it again. My motivation had disappeared completely. I remember sitting there thinking, maybe I'm not smart enough for this. That thought sounds dramatic now, but when people feel emotionally exhausted, the brain becomes extremely unfair. It starts confusing temporary struggle with permanent identity. You are not having difficulty learning English. Suddenly you believe you are a failure as a person. That same week Daniel noticed something was wrong almost immediately. We met at a bookstore cafe one evening, and apparently my face looked like somebody canceled my soul's subscription service. He asked if I was okay. I gave the classic immigrant answer. I'm fine. Which usually means the exact opposite. He watched me quietly for several seconds before asking, do you miss home? And honestly, that question nearly destroyed me emotionally right there beside the coffee machine. Because yes, I missed home terribly. I missed hearing my native language without effort. I missed family dinners. I missed understanding jokes immediately. I missed feeling natural instead of mentally translating existence 24 hours a day. Language learners rarely talk about this part. Speaking another language all day is exhausting. Your brain burns extra energy processing vocabulary, pronunciation, tone, cultural context, and meaning simultaneously. Research actually shows bilingual communication requires more cognitive effort, especially under stress. So if you sometimes feel unusually tired after long English conversations, congratulations. Your brain has basically been doing emotional CrossFit. Daniel listened quietly while I explained how overwhelmed I felt. Then he told me something surprising. Winter affects me too, he admitted. Every year I get quieter. Less energy. Less motivation. That confused me because I assumed Americans naturally understood how to survive American life. But of course that was nonsense. Everybody struggles emotionally sometimes. Loneliness is not an immigrant problem. It is a human problem. The difference is that immigrants often experience it in another language while pretending to function normally. After our conversation, Daniel suggested something simple. Come with me tomorrow morning, he said. Just trust me. The next day he picked me up early while cold wind moved through the empty streets. We drove nearly 40 minutes outside the city while soft music played quietly through the car speakers. I kept asking where we were going, but he refused to answer directly like a suspiciously calm movie character before dramatic plot twists. Eventually we arrived at a huge open park near a lake. The sky looked silver. Cold air moved across the water while birds drifted slowly over the surface. And strangely, everything felt peaceful. Almost unreal. We walked silently for a while before Daniel finally spoke. You know what your problem is? He asked. I prepared emotionally for life-changing wisdom. You spend too much time indoors panicking. Honestly, rude. But unfortunately accurate. Then he laughed softly and explained something interesting. Studies show nature exposure reduces stress hormones and improves mental clarity. Even short walks outside can calm the nervous system significantly. Human brains were not designed to spend all day staring at screens under artificial lighting while inhaling anxiety and caffeine. While walking beside the lake, Daniel encouraged me to speak English slowly without worrying about mistakes. And for some reason, outside in the cold morning air, everything felt easier. Maybe because nature does not judge accents. Trees do not interrupt grammar mistakes. Water does not care about pronunciation. That morning we talked for hours about family, fear, childhood memories, relationships, and dreams. Slowly, I noticed something important. My English sounded more natural when I stopped trying to impress people. The pressure to sound perfect had been choking my confidence for years. There is fascinating psychology behind this too. Perfectionism often increases performance anxiety, which weakens memory recall and communication ability. In other words, obsessing over perfection literally makes performance worse. Somewhere during that walk Daniel suddenly asked, have you ever allowed yourself to simply be bad at something while learning? I laughed immediately because honestly, no. I expected immediate progress in everything. Immediate fluency. Immediate emotional healing. Immediate certainty about life. But real growth is usually slow and uncomfortable. Babies fall thousands of times before walking. Musicians sound terrible before becoming skilled. Relationships survive awkward phases before becoming deep. Yet adults somehow expect themselves to improve instantly or quit dramatically. As the sun slowly appeared through winter clouds, the lake reflected golden light across the cold air. And standing there beside Daniel, I realized something strange. My loneliness had not disappeared completely. I still missed home. I still felt uncertain about my future. But for the first time in months, I did not feel emotionally trapped inside my own head. Maybe healing was not about becoming happy overnight. Maybe it was simply about finding moments where breathing felt easier again. Before driving home, Daniel handed me a small notebook from his backpack. "For your English," he said, smiling. Inside the first page he had written one sentence in careful handwriting. "Slow progress is still progress." And honestly, during that cold, lonely winter, those 5 words warmed me more than the coffee in my hands ever could. The smallest daily habit. Human beings love dramatic transformation stories. We want to believe life changes in one powerful moment. One motivational speech. One perfect morning routine. One magical opportunity. Social media especially loves this fantasy. Somebody posts a video saying they changed their entire life in 30 days. And suddenly thousands of exhausted people are drinking green smoothies at 5 a.m., while emotionally collapsing by Wednesday afternoon. But real life rarely changes through dramatic explosions. Most lasting change happens quietly, almost invisibly, through small habits repeated so often that they eventually become part of your identity. I did not understand this until one ordinary Tuesday morning in Houston when I accidentally discovered the smallest habit that slowly changed my English, my confidence, and strangely, even my relationship with Daniel. It started because of a burnt piece of toast. Seriously. I woke up late for work after sleeping badly again. My apartment felt cold. My kitchen smelled like disappointment and old coffee. I dropped bread into the toaster while trying to review English vocabulary on my phone, completely forgot about it. And suddenly smoke started rising dramatically into the air like my breakfast had entered a protest movement. The fire alarm exploded with noise loud enough to resurrect dead ancestors. I panicked, grabbed a towel, opened windows, waved smoke away like a confused orchestra conductor, and finally collapsed onto the kitchen floor laughing at how ridiculous my life looked. Then something strange happened. Instead of immediately rushing into stress mode like usual, I stayed sitting there quietly for several minutes. Sunlight moved softly across the floor. Cars passed outside. My breathing slowly calmed down. And for the first time in a long time, I noticed how exhausted my mind truly was. Psychologists often talk about something called cognitive overload. When your brain constantly processes stress, anxiety, work pressure, loneliness, language learning, financial fear, and emotional uncertainty at the same time, mental fatigue builds slowly until even small tasks feel overwhelming. That was exactly where I was emotionally. My brain had become a crowded airport with delayed flights and emotional turbulence every day. Later that afternoon, Daniel called me during his lunch break. I jokingly told him about nearly burning down my apartment because apparently basic breakfast preparation was too advanced for me. He laughed so hard he almost dropped his phone. Then he said something simple that stayed with me forever. Maybe you don't need a huge life change right now. Maybe you just need one small calm habit every day. Honestly, at first I hated that advice. Because small habits sound boring. Human egos crave dramatic reinvention. We want cinematic transformation scenes with inspirational background music. We do not want drink water and read slowly for 10 minutes. But Daniel explained something interesting. Studies about habit formation show that tiny consistent behaviors change the brain more effectively than extreme short-term effort. Motivation disappears quickly. Systems remain. That night I decided to try something different. Nothing dramatic. No impossible schedules. No become fluent in 30 days nonsense. I simply sat at my kitchen table with a short English storybook Daniel had recommended and read one page slowly out loud. Just one page. No pressure. No timer. No punishment for mistakes. At first it felt awkward. My pronunciation sounded strange. I stopped constantly to repeat sentences. Some words still felt heavy inside my mouth like unfamiliar furniture. But strangely, because there was no pressure to perform perfectly, I relaxed. And relaxed brains learn better. Research in neuroscience shows lower stress improves memory retention and language processing. In simple words, your brain becomes smarter when it stops panicking. The next morning I repeated the habit. One page. Slowly. Then I started speaking random thoughts out loud while cooking dinner. I am washing the dishes. The rice smells good. I need to buy eggs tomorrow. Honestly, if somebody secretly watched me, they probably assumed I had finally lost emotional stability completely. But speaking simple English during ordinary activities helped more than memorizing giant vocabulary lists ever did. Because language exists for daily life, not academic torture. Children learn through repetition connected to real actions. Adults often forget this and try to study English like they are preparing for interrogation by grammar police. After several weeks, something surprising happened. My listening improved naturally. Conversations felt less terrifying. My brain stopped freezing during simple interactions at stores and restaurants. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped treating every mistake like evidence of personal failure. That change mattered deeply. Perfectionism destroys progress because it creates emotional paralysis. When people fear mistakes too much, they avoid practice completely. Which is tragic because mistakes are literally how the brain learns patterns. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. One evening we met again at our favorite coffee shop, and halfway through conversation he suddenly smiled. "You pause less now," he said. I looked confused. "When you first met me," he explained, "you looked terrified every time you spoke. Now you just talk." That realization shocked me because I had not noticed the change happening. Growth often feels invisible while it is occurring. Like watching plants grow. Day by day nothing seems different. Then suddenly everything has changed quietly in the background. Around that same time, Daniel started sharing more about his own routines. Every morning he wrote in a journal for 10 minutes before work. No phone. No news. No social media chaos. Just thoughts on paper. He explained that journaling helped organize emotions instead of carrying them around mentally all day like emotional grocery bags. So eventually I tried that too. At first my English journal entries were embarrassingly simple. Today was hard. I felt tired. The weather was cold. But gradually the sentences became longer. More natural. More honest. And something fascinating happened psychologically. Writing slowly helped me notice my own emotional patterns more clearly. Studies show expressive writing can reduce stress and improve emotional regulation because language helps organize internal experiences. In other words, sometimes your thoughts become less scary once they leave your head and land on paper. One rainy evening, Daniel came over to my apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just homemade noodles, cheap candles from a grocery store, and soft jazz music playing quietly because apparently we had accidentally become emotionally sophisticated adults. While I cooked, he noticed sticky notes around my apartment with simple English phrases written on them. Patience matters. Slow is okay. Keep speaking. He laughed softly and asked, "Do these actually help?" I thought for a moment before answering honestly. "Not because they're magical," I said. "They just remind me not to panic." And honestly, that was the biggest change happening inside me. I was no longer trying to become perfect overnight. I was building trust with myself slowly. Trust that I could improve gradually without emotionally abusing myself during the process. Trust that mistakes were temporary, not identity. Trust that difficult days did not erase progress. Modern culture teaches people to chase intensity constantly. Intense motivation. Intense productivity. Intense transformation. But nervous systems cannot survive permanent intensity. Human beings need rhythm. Rest. Repetition. Stability. That applies to love too. Healthy relationships are usually built through ordinary repeated kindness rather than dramatic emotional fireworks every weekend. Late that night after dinner, Daniel helped wash dishes while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Then suddenly he looked at me and asked, "Do you realize how different you seem now?" I laughed awkwardly because honestly, I still felt messy inside half the time. But he shook his head smiling. "No," he said quietly. "You're calmer now. You finally stopped fighting yourself every second." That sentence stayed inside me long after he went home. Because maybe confidence is not becoming louder or more impressive. Maybe confidence is simply no longer panicking every time you are imperfect. And strangely enough, that kind of peace started with one tiny habit, one slow page of English, and one burnt piece of toast on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Texas. Meeting his family. There is a very special kind of fear that appears when somebody you love says, "My family wants to meet you." Your soul immediately leaves your body for a few seconds like it needs time to reconsider all your life decisions. Suddenly every insecurity wakes up dramatically. Am I awkward? What if they hate me? What if my English disappears completely and I accidentally introduce myself like a malfunctioning robot? Human beings care deeply about social acceptance because biologically, belonging once meant survival. Which explains why meeting a partner's family can feel emotionally similar to defending a thesis while riding a roller coaster. The first time Daniel invited me to meet his family was during spring. Several months after our relationship quietly became serious without either of us officially announcing it. That is another funny thing about adult relationships. Sometimes nobody says we are together now. One day you simply realize this person knows your coffee order, your emotional breakdown schedule, and which side of the bed you unconsciously steal during sleep. Daniel's parents lived outside Houston in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every lawn looked suspiciously perfect. Like grass itself feared disappointing homeowners. As we drove there, my nervous system behaved like an overworked airport security alarm. I kept adjusting my shirt every 30 seconds while mentally rehearsing English greetings again. Nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting me. Your home is beautiful. Meanwhile, my brain was also preparing for complete social collapse. Anxiety loves preparation. Not useful preparation. Catastrophic preparation. Daniel noticed my silence and laughed softly while driving. Relax, he said. They're just people. Which technically was true. But nervous people do not fear people. We fear judgment, misunderstanding, rejection, awkward silence, cultural mistakes, and accidentally saying something strange because our brain temporarily disconnected from reality. Studies in psychology show social anxiety increases self-monitoring behavior, meaning anxious people become hyper-aware of their words, expressions, gestures, and mistakes. In simple terms, your brain becomes an emotionally exhausted security camera recording everything. When we arrived, his mother opened the front door before we even reached it. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Warm bread, cinnamon, roasted chicken, coffee. The kind of smell that immediately tells your nervous system, okay, maybe nobody is dying today. His mother hugged Daniel first, then smiled warmly at me. Americans hug so confidently. Meanwhile, many immigrants stand there briefly calculating social distance like confused mathematicians. I awkwardly returned the hug while hoping my body language looked approximately human. Inside the house, everything felt both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Family photos covered the walls. A baseball game played quietly on television. Someone laughed loudly from the kitchen. The atmosphere reminded me of home in emotional ways, even though culturally everything looked different. That realization hit me unexpectedly hard. Human families may express love differently across cultures, but warmth feels recognizable everywhere. Daniel's father shook my hand firmly and immediately started talking about traffic, weather, and barbecue like a true American father completing sacred national duties. I understood maybe 75% of what he said, which honestly felt like winning the Olympics compared to my earlier years in America. Still, I laughed nervously several seconds too late at one joke, creating that painfully awkward moment where everybody realizes your brain arrived after the conversation already moved forward. But something surprising happened. Nobody mocked me. Nobody looked impatient. His family simply slowed down naturally when I struggled. And honestly, that kindness nearly made me emotional right beside the mashed potatoes. Dinner conversations moved quickly at first. Americans speak fast during family meals because apparently eating and storytelling simultaneously is considered an advanced cultural sport. At one point, Daniel's sister asked me what surprised me most about living in America. Such a simple question. Yet my brain instantly panicked because now multiple humans were watching me search for vocabulary in real time. But then I remembered something Daniel once told me. You don't need perfect English to connect with people. So instead of trying to sound impressive, I answered honestly. I said the biggest surprise was how lonely adulthood could feel, even in a crowded country. The room became quieter for a second. Then Daniel's mother nodded slowly and said, honestly, a lot of Americans feel that way too. That moment changed something inside me. Before moving to America, I imagined Americans as naturally confident, socially skilled, emotionally independent people who understood life automatically because movies lied to me professionally for years. But sitting there at that dinner table, I realized everybody carried hidden struggles. Different accents. Different histories. Same human fears. That realization made my English feel less like a barrier and more like a bridge slowly being built. Later that evening, Daniel's father invited me outside to help with something in the garage. Instantly my anxiety returned because garages in America are mysterious masculine zones where people suddenly discuss tools, engines, and sports terminology at terrifying speed. I followed him carefully like a nervous intern entering a secret organization. While searching for an extension cord, he suddenly asked me something unexpected. "Do you make Daniel happy?" I nearly dropped the flashlight. Not because the question was aggressive. Actually, his tone sounded calm and sincere. But emotionally, nobody had ever asked me something so direct before. I answered slowly. "I try to." He nodded quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "Good relationships aren't about perfection," he said. "They're about consistency." That sentence stayed in my head all night. Because consistency was exactly what had been changing my life recently. Small habits. Slow conversations. Daily patience. Not dramatic transformation. Just repeated care. Back inside the house, everyone gathered in the living room eating pie while talking about old family memories. Sometimes I understood entire conversations easily. Other times words escaped me completely. But for the first time since moving to America, I did not feel ashamed when I missed something. I simply asked people to repeat themselves. Calmly. Naturally. And honestly, that may sound small, but psychologically it represented enormous growth. Shame blocks learning. Curiosity invites it. People improve languages faster once embarrassment stops controlling them. At one point, Daniel sat beside me quietly while his family argued playfully about old vacation stories. He leaned closer and whispered, "You're doing great." I laughed softly because internally I still felt like a confused exchange student trapped inside a family sitcom. But then something strange happened. I looked around the room and realized I was relaxing. Really relaxing. My shoulders no longer felt tense. My brain no longer scanned constantly for mistakes. I was simply existing inside the moment instead of performing survival. That feeling was new. On the drive home, city lights reflected softly across the windshield while late-night radio music played quietly. Daniel reached for my hand at a red light and asked, "So, what did you think?" I stared out the window for a few seconds before answering honestly. "Your family feels warm," I said. Then after a pause I added, "but also terrifying." He laughed so hard he nearly missed the green light. But later, lying awake in my apartment, I kept thinking about something deeper. For years I believed belonging depended on flawless English, perfect confidence, and total cultural understanding. But maybe belonging begins much earlier than that. Maybe it begins the moment people make space for you exactly as you are. Broken sentences. Nervous laughter. Slow progress and all. And somewhere between awkward dinner conversations, warm bread smells, and late-night Texas roads, I realized I was no longer only surviving life in America anymore. Slowly, quietly, I was building a home inside it. We almost broke up. Nobody talks enough about how fragile love becomes when two people are tired at the same time. Movies usually show dramatic betrayals, screaming arguments, or somebody running through an airport in the rain. Real relationships often break much more quietly. through exhaustion, misunderstanding, unspoken fears. Two nervous systems accidentally hurting each other while both secretly needing comfort. And honestly, that kind of pain is harder because there is no clear villain. Just two humans struggling to feel understood. The fight that almost ended my relationship with Daniel started over something unbelievably small. Isn't that always how it happens? Nobody destroys love because of one dirty coffee cup or one missed phone call. Small moments simply uncover deeper fears already hiding underneath. It happened during summer, nearly a year after we met. By then my English had improved enough that conversations no longer felt like surviving verbal earthquakes. I worked fewer hours at the restaurant because I finally found a better office job answering customer emails and phone calls. The first week there, I nearly fainted from stress every time the phone rang. Americans speak so quickly on business calls it sometimes sounds like auctioneers competing against caffeine. But slowly, day by day, I adapted. Still, adaptation comes with strange emotional side effects. The more independent I became, the more terrified I felt about the future. Success can be scary too because once life improves, you suddenly have something meaningful to lose. Around that same time Daniel became busier at work. Longer hours. More stress. More canceled dinner plans. We still loved each other deeply, but our conversations changed subtly. Less curiosity. More logistics. Did you eat? What time will you be home? Can you buy milk? Adult relationships sometimes accidentally become unpaid management positions. Psychologists call this emotional drift. Not dramatic disconnection, but gradual reduction in emotional presence. One Friday evening we planned dinner together after not seeing each other properly for almost a week. I spent ridiculous amounts of time cleaning my apartment even though Daniel had already seen it messy many times before. Anxiety makes people do strange things. Somehow I believed perfectly folded towels might emotionally stabilize the relationship. But nearly an hour passed after he was supposed to arrive. No message. No call. My nervous system immediately opened its favorite activity, catastrophic storytelling. By the time Daniel finally knocked on the door, my brain had already imagined 17 relationship disasters and possibly international betrayal. He walked inside looking exhausted. Tie loosened. Hair messy. Eyes tired. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "Work became insane today." Normally I would have understood. But emotionally exhausted people rarely respond logically. Instead of greeting him warmly, I exploded. Not dramatically at first. Just cold sharp comments delivered with Olympic-level passive aggression. Honestly, human beings should receive medals for the creative ways we communicate emotional pain indirectly. Daniel looked confused at first, then frustrated. "I said I'm sorry," he repeated. But by then my emotions were no longer responding to reality. They were responding to accumulated fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of not being important enough. Fear that our relationship was slowly fading while I pretended everything felt normal. Arguments are fascinating psychologically because people often fight about surface issues while deeper emotions remain hidden underneath. I was not truly angry about lateness. I was terrified of losing connection. But instead of saying, "I miss you and feel insecure lately," I chose the emotionally mature strategy of becoming defensive and weird. Brilliant decision. The conversation escalated quickly. Daniel accused me of overthinking everything. I accused him of emotionally disappearing. At one point we both stopped listening completely and simply waited for opportunities to defend ourselves. Communication experts actually say most relationship conflict happens because people listen to respond instead of listening to understand. That night we became perfect examples. Then suddenly Daniel said something that completely shattered me. I feel like nothing I do is enough for you anymore. Silence filled the apartment immediately afterward. Because deep down, I knew he was partly right. I had started measuring love through constant reassurance again. More texts. More attention. More certainty. Anxiety is greedy like that. No amount of reassurance ever feels permanent because fear always demands another emotional receipt tomorrow. Meanwhile, Daniel looked emotionally exhausted from trying to prove his love repeatedly while balancing work stress and life responsibilities. He grabbed his jacket quietly and said, "Maybe we both need space tonight." Then he left. The apartment felt horrifyingly silent after the door closed. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that arrives before an actual breakup. It feels like standing on thin ice hearing cracks underneath your feet while pretending everything is stable. I barely slept that night. My brain replayed the argument, repeatedly searching for alternate dialogue options like emotionally unstable time travel. Around 3 in the morning I walked into my kitchen and noticed my English notebook still sitting on the table from earlier practice. One sentence written weeks ago suddenly caught my attention. Slow progress is still progress. I stared at those words for several seconds before realizing something painful. I had learned patience with language learning, but not yet with love. When people learn English, they accept misunderstanding as part of growth. They repeat sentences. Clarify meaning. Try again tomorrow. But in relationships, many people expect immediate emotional perfection. Immediate understanding. Immediate harmony. Which is impossible because human beings are far more complicated than grammar exercises. The next day Daniel did not message me. Normally that would have triggered emotional apocalypse inside my nervous system. But strangely, I stayed calmer this time. Maybe because deep down I finally understood the real problem. Neither of us was evil. Neither of us stopped caring. We were simply exhausted people carrying stress badly. That afternoon I walked slowly through a nearby park, trying to organize my thoughts. Summer heat pressed heavily against the sidewalks while children played near fountains and couples walked dogs together. And somewhere during that walk, I realized something uncomfortable about myself. I had spent years believing love should remove insecurity completely. But healthy relationships are not emotional anesthesia. They simply create safe spaces where fears can be discussed honestly instead of hidden behind anger. Later that evening Daniel finally called. His voice sounded softer than the night before. Tired, but calmer. We talked slowly for almost an hour. Really talked. Not defending. Not interrupting. Just explaining honestly what we had both been feeling. Daniel admitted work pressure had overwhelmed him emotionally. I admitted my fear of abandonment had been quietly growing again. Then he said something I will probably remember forever. Loving someone patiently is harder than loving someone passionately. That sentence hit deeply because it was true. Passion feels exciting at the beginning. Patience becomes necessary later. Real relationships survive not because people never disappoint each other, but because they learn how to repair emotional damage gently afterward. Before hanging up, Daniel laughed softly and said, "You know what's ironic? I asked what. You used to panic speaking one English sentence, he said. Now you can argue emotionally for 45 minutes straight. I laughed harder than expected because honestly, emotional fluency had arrived before emotional wisdom. But maybe that was growth too. Messy, imperfect growth. A few days later we met again at our favorite coffee shop. No dramatic movie reunion. No orchestral music. Just two tired adults choosing each other again carefully and slowly. And sitting there beside him, watching sunlight move across the table while coffee cooled between us, I realized something important. Love does not become real when conflict disappears. Love becomes real when two people stay long enough to understand each other after the conflict finally ends. Patience changed my English. One of the strangest moments in adult life happens when you suddenly realize the thing you were chasing desperately has been growing quietly in the background the entire time. It is like looking at yourself in an old mirror and noticing your face somehow looks calmer, softer, more certain. Not perfect. Just less afraid. That realization hit me one random afternoon inside a crowded grocery store in Houston while trying to explain a coupon problem to a cashier. Not exactly the cinematic breakthrough scene I imagined for my English journey, but honestly life rarely hires Hollywood writers. The cashier spoke quickly while scanning groceries with terrifying efficiency. Normally situations like this used to destroy my nervous system. Old me would panic immediately, forget basic vocabulary, and mentally leave my body near the frozen vegetables section. But that day something felt different. I listened carefully, asked her politely to repeat one sentence, answered naturally, and solved the problem within 2 minutes. Then I walked out carrying grocery bags and suddenly stopped near my car thinking, wait, when did that become easy? Progress feels invisible when experienced slowly. That is why many people quit learning English too early. They expect dramatic overnight transformation instead of subtle daily improvement. Human psychology loves immediate rewards. Studies about motivation show people struggle with long-term growth because the brain naturally prioritizes visible short-term results. In simple words, your nervous system wants proof quickly or it starts emotionally screaming like a toddler inside a supermarket. For years, I treated English like a race against time. Every mistake felt dangerous. Every awkward conversation became evidence I was failing. But somewhere between meeting Daniel, surviving loneliness, and learning emotional patience, my relationship with language had changed completely. English stopped feeling like an enemy testing my worth. It became part of my daily life. Something imperfect but natural. Around that time Daniel and I developed small routines together that accidentally improved my English even more. Every Sunday morning we visited the same farmer's market outside the city. There were fruit stands, live music, flowers, coffee trucks, and old couples walking slowly while holding hands like emotionally stable legends. Daniel encouraged me to order food, ask questions, and start small conversations with strangers naturally instead of rehearsing every sentence mentally beforehand. At first this terrified me. Spontaneous conversation felt emotionally illegal. But slowly I noticed something fascinating. Native speakers did not expect perfection. Most people cared more about energy and confidence than flawless grammar. Humans are surprisingly forgiving when communication feels genuine. One morning while buying strawberries from an older woman at the market, I accidentally used the wrong verb tense again. Instantly my old panic tried returning. But before I could apologize dramatically, the woman simply smiled warmly and continued the conversation normally. That moment stayed with me because it revealed something important. Most embarrassment exists inside our own heads far more than reality. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. Humans constantly overestimate how much other people notice their mistakes. Meanwhile, strangers are usually too busy worrying about their own lives, bills, relationships, and whether they remembered to buy toilet paper. Daniel noticed my growing confidence before I did. One evening while driving home from dinner, he suddenly said, "You laugh differently now." Honestly, that sentence confused me so much I thought maybe exhaustion had finally broken his brain. "What does that even mean?" I asked. He smiled while keeping his eyes on the road. "When we first met, you laughed nervously after almost every English sentence," he explained. "Like you were apologizing for existing. Now you just laugh because something is funny." I turned quiet after hearing that because deep down I knew exactly what he meant. Fear had shaped my personality for years. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of not belonging. When people live under constant anxiety, their entire nervous system changes. They become cautious, hyper-aware, emotionally defensive. Research on chronic stress shows long-term anxiety affects confidence, memory, concentration, and even body language. In other words, fear was not only affecting my English. It was affecting who I believed I was allowed to become. That same month something unexpected happened at work. A new employee started training in the office, another immigrant learning English. During meetings he barely spoke. His hands shook slightly when answering questions. And suddenly I recognized myself completely in his nervous silence. One afternoon during lunch break he quietly admitted, "I think my English is terrible." Without thinking, I laughed softly and said, "No. You're just scared." The moment those words left my mouth, I realized they applied to my old self too. Most language learners are not failing because they lack intelligence. They are emotionally overwhelmed. Fear interrupts listening. Anxiety blocks memory recall. Shame destroys confidence. Learning becomes easier once the nervous system feels safe enough to make mistakes without emotional catastrophe. After that conversation, I started helping him practice small daily English naturally during work breaks. Nothing intense. Just ordinary conversations about coffee, weather, traffic, movies, and life. And honestly, teaching him made me understand my own growth more clearly. Sometimes you do not realize how far you have come until you meet somebody standing exactly where you once stood. One rainy evening Daniel and I sat together on my apartment balcony listening to distant thunder move across the Texas sky. The city lights blurred softly through the rain while warm air carried the smell of wet pavement and summer storms. We talked quietly about future plans, work stress, family, and random memories from childhood. At one point Daniel suddenly looked at me carefully and asked, "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" I laughed immediately because unfortunately yes, I remembered. "Car bad," I said dramatically while covering my face with embarrassment. Daniel laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Honestly, he admitted, "I had no idea what you were trying to say at first." I stared at him in complete betrayal. "Wait, seriously?" He nodded while still laughing. "But you looked so determined. Like your soul was fighting for survival." We both laughed for several minutes afterward, but later that night his words stayed in my mind differently. Back then I believed communication required perfection. But the truth was much simpler. Communication only required willingness. Willingness to try. Willingness to stay present despite discomfort. Willingness to sound awkward long enough for connection to happen anyway. That realization changed everything. Because patience is not passive waiting. Patience is active trust. Trust that understanding develops slowly. Trust that confidence grows through repetition. Trust that difficult conversations eventually become easier if you survive enough imperfect ones. Modern culture constantly pressures people to rush transformation. Become fluent fast. Heal fast. Succeed fast. But nervous systems do not bloom under pressure. Human beings grow through repetition, safety, connection, and time. The same way relationships deepen gradually. The same way children learn language naturally through constant exposure instead of panic. Before going inside that night, Daniel wrapped his arm around me while rain continued falling softly across the balcony railing. Then he whispered something simple that somehow felt larger than every motivational video I had ever watched online. "You stopped trying to sound perfect," he said. "That's when your English finally became real." And standing there beside him in the warm Texas rain, I realized maybe fluency was never about speaking like somebody else. Maybe fluency was finally feeling unafraid to sound like myself. The night he proposed. Most people imagine love changing their life in one dramatic cinematic moment. Fireworks. Expensive restaurants. Somebody crying beautifully under perfect lighting while emotional piano music plays somewhere in the background. Real love usually looks much less glamorous. It looks like grocery shopping together while arguing softly about which tomatoes are less disappointing. It looks like waiting in traffic while one person complains about work and the other pretends not to laugh. It looks like sitting quietly beside someone after a terrible day and realizing their presence calms your nervous system more effectively than sleep. And strangely, that is exactly why the night Daniel proposed felt so overwhelming. Because by then, love no longer felt exciting in a temporary way. It felt steady, safe, real, which honestly terrified me more than passion ever had. The proposal happened almost 2 years after our first rainy night meeting in that parking lot. By then life looked very different. My English no longer controlled my confidence every second of the day. I had a stable job, close friends, routines I loved, and for the first time since moving to America, I stopped feeling like my entire existence was temporary. There is powerful psychology behind that feeling. Humans need emotional stability before they can fully relax into attachment. When survival constantly consumes your attention, love feels risky because your nervous system stays focused on protection instead of connection. But slowly, patiently, life had softened around me. One October evening Daniel suggested we drive outside the city after dinner because the weather felt too nice to waste indoors. Americans become poetic whenever temperatures drop below unbearable. The air that night felt cool and calm, carrying that soft autumn smell of dry leaves and distant rain. Houston traffic finally relaxed after sunset while warm lights glowed through restaurants and gas stations along the highway. I remember watching the city disappear slowly behind us while soft music played quietly inside the car. At one point Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand gently without saying anything. That small gesture still affects me more than grand romantic speeches sometimes. Real intimacy often hides inside ordinary touch. Research about emotional bonding shows physical affection lowers cortisol levels and increases feelings of safety and trust. In simple words, your nervous system literally relaxes around people you deeply love. We eventually arrived near the same lake park where he once brought me during that lonely winter months earlier. The place looked different now. Autumn leaves moved softly across walking paths while the lake reflected orange lights from the distance. The air smelled cold and clean. Somewhere far away, somebody laughed near the water. And suddenly I realized something strange. This place had quietly witnessed so many versions of me already. The lonely immigrant. The anxious English learner. The emotionally overwhelmed boyfriend. The slowly healing man learning patience one awkward conversation at a time. We walked slowly beside the water while talking about random things at first. Work stories. Family updates. Funny memories. Then gradually the conversation became quieter. More thoughtful. Daniel stopped near the lake and stared out across the water for several seconds before speaking again. "Do you remember how terrified you used to be speaking English?" he asked, smiling softly. I laughed immediately because unfortunately, yes, I remembered every painful second. Honestly, I admitted, sometimes I still feel scared. He nodded gently. "I think everyone feels scared sometimes," he said. "The difference is you don't run away from it anymore." That sentence stayed suspended in the cold air between us. Because deep down, I knew he was right. For years fear controlled every major part of my life. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being enough. Fear of sounding stupid. But somewhere along this journey, patience slowly replaced panic. Not perfectly. Not magically. Just gradually. Like sunrise arriving quietly without asking permission. Then Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. And immediately my brain stopped functioning normally. Human intuition is fascinating because sometimes your body understands what is happening before your thoughts catch up emotionally. Suddenly my heartbeat became ridiculously loud. My hands felt cold. Time slowed down dramatically like the universe hired a movie editor for 10 seconds. Daniel looked nervous too, which honestly made the moment feel even more real. His hands shook slightly while holding a small dark box. "I had this whole speech planned," he admitted, laughing softly. "But now I forgot most of it." I laughed too, mostly because my nervous system was collapsing politely. Then he looked directly at me with the kind of calm honesty that feels impossible to fake. "You changed my life slowly," he said. "Not through huge dramatic moments. Just through patience. Through showing up. Through staying." I felt tears immediately pressing behind my eyes because those words described exactly what I had been learning about love all along. Real love rarely arrives through explosive perfection. It grows through repeated care. Through ordinary days survived together. Through misunderstandings repaired gently instead of abandoned quickly. Daniel opened the box slowly. Inside sat a simple silver ring reflecting soft light from the lake behind us. Nothing flashy. Nothing excessive. Somehow that made it more emotional. Because it felt honest. "I know life will still be hard sometimes," he continued quietly. "We'll still argue. We'll still get stressed. We'll still have bad days. But I want to keep building a life with you slowly anyway." There are moments when language becomes too small for human emotion. Ironically, after spending years terrified of English, I suddenly could not find a single useful word in any language. I just stood there crying softly beside the lake while cold wind moved around us. Then eventually I laughed through tears and said the most emotionally sophisticated response possible. Seriously? Daniel laughed immediately. That's your answer? I covered my face from embarrassment while nodding repeatedly like an emotionally unstable owl. Yes, I finally whispered. Of course, yes. He slid the ring onto my finger while both of us laughed nervously because apparently even proposals become awkward when real people are involved. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked dramatically like it also supported emotional commitment. And standing there beside him, something settled quietly inside my chest. Not excitement exactly. Peace. Deep peaceful certainty. The kind I used to chase desperately through achievement, speed, and perfection. But peace never arrived through rushing. It arrived through patience. On the drive home, I kept staring at the ring occasionally like my brain needed visual confirmation that reality was still functioning correctly. Daniel teased me gently for smiling at absolutely nothing every few minutes. But honestly, I was not only thinking about marriage. I was thinking about the entire journey. The terrified man sitting alone in a Texas parking lot years earlier could never have imagined this future. Back then I believed being loved required becoming perfect first. Perfect English. Perfect confidence. Perfect life. But love found me while I was still unfinished. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. Human beings do not become worthy of love after fixing every flaw. Sometimes love is exactly what gives people courage to grow slowly into themselves. Later that night before sleeping, Daniel wrapped his arms around me while city lights glowed softly through the apartment window. Then he whispered something so simple it almost broke my heart completely. See, he said quietly. Nothing good in our story happened fast. And honestly, he was right. The best parts never do. Our little family began. Nobody tells you how quiet happiness can feel at first. Movies usually show giant emotional moments with dramatic music, people crying beautifully, and sunlight appearing at suspiciously perfect angles. Real happiness often enters your life wearing sweatpants while carrying grocery bags and asking if you remembered to buy milk. It arrives slowly enough that you almost miss it happening. And honestly, maybe that is why so many people spend years chasing excitement while accidentally overlooking peace. A year after Daniel proposed, we moved into a small house outside Houston with squeaky wooden floors, a tiny backyard, and a kitchen barely large enough for two adults to cook without accidentally elbowing each other emotionally. The house was not impressive by social media standards. No giant windows. No luxury furniture. No inspirational minimalist design making the place look like nobody had ever eaten noodles there at midnight during emotional collapse. But it felt warm. Safe. Ours. The first night after moving in, we sat on the living room floor surrounded by unopened boxes eating cheap pizza because apparently adulthood is mostly just pretending cardboard chaos is temporary. Daniel leaned his head against my shoulder and whispered, "This feels weirdly official now." I laughed softly because he was right. Building a home with someone changes love psychologically. Relationships stop feeling theoretical. Suddenly your lives become connected through routines, responsibilities, habits, grocery lists, shared bills, and tiny repeated acts of care. Studies about long-term relationships show emotional intimacy grows strongest not through constant excitement, but through reliability and daily support. In simple words, love deepens when people consistently make each other's lives feel safer. Around that same time my English reached a strange new stage too. I no longer translated every sentence mentally before speaking. Sometimes entire conversations happened naturally without panic. The first time I realized this fully was during a neighborhood barbecue hosted by one of our neighbors. A year earlier, events like that would have terrified me emotionally. Large groups. Fast conversations. Loud background noise. Small talk. Basically the Olympics of social anxiety. But that afternoon I stood in someone's backyard holding a paper plate of grilled chicken while casually discussing weather, football, and ridiculous gas prices with complete strangers. Halfway through the conversation, I suddenly realized something shocking. I was not thinking about English anymore. I was simply communicating. That moment felt strangely emotional because for years English had controlled so much of my identity. Every mistake once felt catastrophic. Every awkward pause felt humiliating. But now language had become something softer. Less like performance. More like breathing. Of course, life did not magically become perfect afterward. Real adulthood refuses to respect cinematic endings. Some months were stressful financially. Some weeks Daniel and I argued over stupid things like dishes, schedules, or whether grocery shopping together somehow required military-level planning. Human beings remain wonderfully ridiculous even inside healthy relationships. But our conflicts changed over time. Earlier in our relationship, arguments felt dangerous because fear controlled both of us. Fear of abandonment. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being enough. Later, disagreements became less catastrophic because trust existed underneath them. Secure love changes how the nervous system responds to conflict. Research on attachment theory shows emotionally safe relationships reduce panic reactions because people trust the connection will survive temporary tension. In simple terms, mature love feels less like emotional survival and more like teamwork between two imperfect humans. Then one autumn afternoon, everything changed again. Daniel came home unusually quiet after work. Not upset exactly. Just thoughtful. He sat beside me on the couch while I practiced English reading aloud from a novel and asked, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" Honestly, my soul briefly left my body again. Not because I disliked the idea. Because parenthood felt terrifyingly adult. I still occasionally burned toast and lost socks inside my own house. Yet somehow society expected humans like us to raise children responsibly. Incredible confidence from civilization, honestly. But over the following months, we talked about it more seriously. Family. Future. Stability. Fear. Hope. And strangely, the conversations did not feel impossible anymore. Years earlier, I viewed the future like a giant dark tunnel filled with uncertainty. Now it looked different. Not perfectly clear. But less frightening because I was no longer facing it alone. Psychologists often say emotional security increases long-term thinking because the nervous system finally exits survival mode. That explained why dreams suddenly felt possible instead of terrifying. Then one rainy spring morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen holding a small white pregnancy test while staring at me silently. For approximately 5 full seconds, neither of us spoke. Human beings always imagine important life moments happening with profound speeches. In reality, most major events begin with stunned silence and somebody saying, "Wait, seriously?" Which is exactly what happened. Then Daniel started laughing nervously while I stood frozen beside the refrigerator, emotionally buffering like outdated internet. We were going to become parents. Honestly, the fear arrived first. Not joy. Fear. Huge, overwhelming fear. Could we handle this? Would we be good parents? Would our child grow up understanding both cultures? Would I still feel like an outsider forever? Fear is natural whenever life becomes meaningful. People only fear losing things they deeply care about. But beneath the fear, another feeling slowly appeared. Gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude. That night we sat together in the backyard while warm Texas rain moved softly through the dark sky above us. The air smelled like wet grass in summer. Daniel rested his hand gently over mine and whispered, "Can you believe how much life changed?" I looked at him quietly for several seconds before answering. Because honestly, sometimes I still could not believe it myself. The lonely immigrant who once panicked ordering coffee in English was now building a family in America. Not because life became easy. Not because I suddenly became fearless. But because I stopped rushing transformation. Somewhere along the journey, patience slowly rewired my entire life. Patience with language. Patience with love. Patience with healing. Patience with myself. Later that year our son was born during a stormy night in Houston. And standing inside the hospital room hearing his tiny cry for the first time, I experienced the strangest emotional realization of my life. For years I believed fluency meant speaking perfect English. But true fluency was much deeper than grammar or pronunciation. True fluency meant finally feeling able to belong inside my own life without apologizing constantly for who I was becoming. A few weeks after bringing our son home, I stood alone in the kitchen one early morning while holding him carefully against my chest. Rain tapped softly against the windows just like the night I first met Daniel years earlier. The house smelled like coffee, baby lotion, and exhaustion. Our son slept peacefully while tiny breaths moved softly against my shoulder. And suddenly I realized something almost painfully beautiful. Every important part of my life had grown slowly. Love. Confidence. Language. Family. None of it arrived quickly. None of it happened perfectly. But maybe the best things never do. Maybe real happiness is not something humans chase aggressively until they capture it. Maybe happiness quietly grows while people are busy learning patience one ordinary day at a time. Nothing beautiful happens fast. There is a strange moment that happens to many people somewhere in their 30s. One quiet, ordinary moment when you suddenly stop in the middle of daily life and realize you survived versions of yourself you once thought would destroy you completely. It does not happen during dramatic celebrations or inspirational speeches. Usually it happens while washing dishes, driving home from work, folding tiny baby clothes, or standing in a grocery store deciding whether avocados are worth the emotional and financial risk today. Life changes quietly like that. And honestly, maybe that is why so many people miss their own healing while constantly searching for bigger signs. 3 years after meeting Daniel in that rainy Texas parking lot, my life looked almost unrecognizable compared to the lonely man who once sat alone eating microwaved noodles in silence. Our son had started walking recently, which meant our house now permanently looked like a tiny emotionally unstable tornado visited every afternoon. Toys everywhere. Tiny socks appearing in impossible locations. Crushed cereal hiding mysteriously inside couch cushions. Parenthood is beautiful, but it also humbles adults quickly. One minute you are discussing emotional growth and long-term goals. The next minute you are negotiating passionately with a 2-year-old terrorist about why crayons should not enter electrical outlets. One Saturday morning I woke up unusually early before sunrise. The house was silent except for soft rain tapping against the windows. Daniel and our son still slept upstairs while pale morning light moved slowly across the kitchen floor. I made coffee quietly and stood near the window watching wet streets shine under streetlights outside. And suddenly, without warning, memories flooded back into my mind. The broken car. The fear. The loneliness. The terrible English. The panic attacks before conversations. The nights I genuinely believed life would never feel stable again. It amazed me how real those fears once felt. Human beings are fascinating because the brain treats temporary emotions like permanent reality. When people feel lonely, they believe loneliness will last forever. When they feel lost, they assume clarity will never arrive. Psychologists call this emotional forecasting bias. The mind struggles imagining change while trapped inside current pain. That is why hopeless moments feel so convincing. Your nervous system whispers, "This is your life now." But feelings are weather, not identity. They pass, shift, soften, transform. Sometimes very slowly. Sometimes painfully slowly. Standing there beside the kitchen window, I realized something almost funny. The biggest transformation in my life had not been learning English. It had been learning patience. Patience with uncertainty. Patience with mistakes. Patience with healing. Patience with love. Modern culture trains people to rush everything. Faster success. Faster bodies. Faster money. Faster happiness. Faster fluency. Even relaxation becomes competitive somehow. People watch productivity videos while stressed about not relaxing efficiently enough. Meanwhile, the nervous system quietly begs for mercy like an exhausted employee trapped inside corporate meetings forever. But human beings are not machines designed for endless acceleration. Nature itself moves slowly. Trees grow slowly. Seasons change slowly. Trust develops slowly. Children learn language slowly through repetition and safety, not panic and shame. Yet adults constantly punish themselves for not transforming overnight. Around that same time I started volunteering occasionally at a local community center helping new immigrants practice conversational English. Honestly, the first day nearly broke my heart emotionally because I recognized myself inside so many nervous faces. People apologized constantly for mistakes. They hesitated before speaking. They laughed awkwardly after simple sentences exactly like I used to do. One older man quietly admitted, "Sometimes I feel stupid speaking English." I looked at him for several seconds before answering carefully. "You are not stupid," I said softly. "You are just uncomfortable." That distinction matters deeply. Human brains confuse discomfort with incapability all the time. But discomfort is often proof of growth happening in real time. The brain resists unfamiliar situations naturally because survival once depended on avoiding uncertainty. Learning a language, building relationships, moving countries, becoming parents. Trusting people again after heartbreak, all of these experiences force humans beyond emotional comfort zones. That does not mean failure is happening. Usually it means transformation is happening slowly underneath the fear. One evening after dinner, Daniel found me sitting alone on the back porch while warm summer wind moved softly through the dark Texas night. The house behind us glowed warmly through the windows while our son slept upstairs surrounded by stuffed animals and absolute toddler chaos. Daniel sat beside me quietly holding 2 mugs of tea. "You look thoughtful," he said. I smiled softly and admitted I had been thinking about how much life changed since we met. He laughed immediately. "Thankfully," he said. "You were emotionally dramatic back then. Honestly, rude again. But unfortunately accurate." Then he grew quieter for a moment before asking something unexpected. "Do you ever miss the old version of yourself?" The question surprised me because I had never considered it seriously before. I thought carefully for several seconds while distant thunder rolled softly across the sky. "Sometimes," I admitted finally. "Not because life was better, but because everything felt simpler somehow." Daniel nodded slowly like he understood exactly what I meant. Growth is strange because gaining new peace often requires grieving old identities too. The younger version of me believed happiness would arrive after becoming perfect. Perfect English. Perfect confidence. Perfect success. But perfection is emotionally exhausting because it constantly moves further away every time humans approach it. Peace arrived only after I stopped trying to earn worthiness through achievement. Somewhere along the journey, I learned that people deserve love while still unfinished. While still confused. While still healing. Later that night after Daniel went inside, I stayed outside alone listening to rain begin falling gently through the warm darkness. And suddenly, I remembered the exact sentence Daniel told me the night he fixed my car years earlier. "You don't have to speak perfect English to belong here." Back then I thought he was only talking about language. Now I understand something deeper. Human beings spend too much of life believing they must become perfect before they deserve belonging. But belonging does not begin after flawless transformation. It begins the moment people allow themselves to exist imperfectly without shame. Maybe that is why patience matters so much. Patience creates space for growth without cruelty. Without panic. Without impossible expectations crushing the nervous system daily. Before going back inside, I looked through the rain toward the quiet neighborhood around us. Warm lights glowed softly from nearby houses while distant cars moved slowly through wet streets. Ordinary life. Beautiful ordinary life. And honestly, that was the real miracle all along. Not dramatic success. Not flawless English. Not cinematic romance. Just this. A peaceful home. A family asleep upstairs. A heart no longer sprinting desperately towards some imaginary finish line. If you are listening to this story while feeling behind in life, while struggling with English, while healing from loneliness, while fearing your future will never become stable, I want you to remember something simple. Nothing beautiful in this story happened fast. Not love. Not confidence. Not family. Not healing. Everything important grew slowly through awkward conversations, repeated mistakes, difficult seasons, patient people, and ordinary days that seemed insignificant at the time. Progress rarely announces itself dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly while you are busy surviving. And one day, you suddenly realize your life no longer hurts in the same way it used to. Maybe that is what real growth feels like. Not becoming someone entirely new overnight. Just becoming softer, calmer, and more honest with yourself over time. And maybe, just maybe, your life is not running late at all. Maybe your story is simply growing at the speed your heart needs. Sometimes the hardest part of learning English is not grammar, pronunciation, or vocabulary. It is surviving the moments when you feel invisible, exhausted, or emotionally lost while still trying to believe your future can become beautiful. If this story stayed with you tonight, maybe it is because a part of your heart is tired of rushing everything too. Tired of comparing your progress to strangers online. Tired of feeling late in life, in love, or in English. But remember this carefully, the most meaningful things in life usually grow slowly. Real confidence grows slowly. Real love grows slowly. Real healing grows slowly. And maybe your English is improving quietly right now in ways you cannot fully see yet. One day, you will suddenly notice that conversations feel easier, your heart feels calmer. And the life you once dreamed about is already sitting quietly beside you. So before you give up on yourself, stay a little longer. Keep listening. Keep reading. Keep speaking slowly, even when your voice shakes sometimes. Because your story may be changing in silence right now, exactly like mine did during those rainy nights in Texas. And maybe in the next video, you will hear another story that feels strangely connected to your own life in a way you never expected. If you enjoy slow English stories about love, life in America, relationships, family, and emotional healing, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what part of this story touched your heart the most. Your comment may help another person feel less alone tonight. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next slow English listening practice story designed to help you improve your English naturally while relaxing your mind at the same time. Until next time, take a deep breath, slow down a little, and remember, nothing beautiful truly grows in a hurry.